Hi everybody. Seems like the music has faded, which means it's my chance to talk. I'm Liz Mosley, I'm an editor and partner at Tortoise. Hello, and welcome back to the Climate Summit. My colleague Patricia has taken over in the chat. Hello Patricia, nice to see you, and thank you very much to everybody for sticking with us this morning. I've learnt tons, I don't know about anybody else. I'm very much a enthusiastic but moderately clueless amateur when it comes to questions of accelerating net zero. So forgive me as I adopt that pose for the next 45 or so minutes. Happily, we've got a room full of people contributing who really know what they're talking about, and we've got some amazing invited experts who are going to help us to kind of tackle this question of building back better. It seems to me, if you just forgive me to sort of pause for a moment to see where we've got to after the first few sessions this morning, we're all in agreement that net zero is the goal, and we're less in agreement about how and how quickly we can get there, which of course is the whole point of today. And that is because it's really complex, and much of the discussion today, it seems to me, has been focused on this idea of trade-offs. You know, there's a battle of ideas and of people, and to an extent of businesses, and the question of who's going to be a winner and who's going to be a loser in what we choose to do next in order to sort of get on the path properly to net zero is really at the nub of it. And the danger is, of course, that because if we can't agree what is an acceptable trade-off in order to achieve the net zero goal, then we sort of we're stymied and we don't move fast enough. So I want to use this session to explore the sort of seesaw, the balance between incentives and disincentives, and the requirement for new stuff, new kit, new infrastructure, new windmills, new solar panels, all of that against the best and most efficient ways to repurpose potentially what there already is. This is where the sort of, for me, the interesting sort of nub of it is, like I say, forgive me, I'm an enthusiastic amateur. I might bring it down a notch a little bit so that we can nut out some of the specifics that we've mentioned already. I think optimism is good. I think pragmatism is better when it comes to accelerating net zero. So that's how I'm going to kind of try and get on with the session. Do keep joining in. We have a brilliant policy representative. We've got a representative from an energy company and a representative from the steel industry. So there's lots to go at. So I'm going to come first if I can, because it sort of picks up on where we ended the last session, to Rachel, if I may, Rachel Fletcher. Hello, it's just good afternoon. I was going to say good morning. It's just good afternoon. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here. You're Director of Regulation at Octopus Energy. And for people who don't know, Octopus is an affordable, renewable energy provider, consumer energy provider, right? It's all consumer energy, your business.
Yes, I mean, we are an energy retailer. We're supplying around 2 million homes in the UK right now. So it's grown from nothing in 2016 to actually one of the biggest energy retailers in the country. All of our electricity is green, and the company's mission is to help people live cleaner, cheaper lives. And to really be a force behind a faster and affordable transition to net zero. So that's all that we're about. We do own and invest in renewable power directly. We also have an increasing involvement in the electric vehicle world, both in terms of providing vehicles, but very importantly, in helping people charge those vehicles affordably, whether at home or whether they're out and about. And we are really excited as well about the opportunity to decarbonize heat and the opportunity to get heat pumps into people's homes. I think some of what you said at the beginning, Liz, is really interesting. I agree, we don't want to be overly optimistic, but at Octopus Energy, we believe passionately actually that we can help people live affordable green lives. We've already heard earlier today, that the wind power in the UK is the cheapest form of energy. So the ambition here is to get that cheap green energy to people and to help people use energy when it is cheap and plentiful, and to shift consumption away from where it is expensive. So I think there is a realistic opportunity here, I think, to drive forward in a really positive direction.
That's a brilliant place to start. We were hearing some very big numbers at the end of the last session, which was all about clean energy and huge sums of money that will be required to build sufficient capacity, renewable energy generation capacity, to satisfy what we need to switch the lights on and everything else. What's your view, Rachel, on the balance between what more kit is required to be built and constructed relative to what we can achieve in terms of energy efficiency and sustainability from what repurposing and using better what there already is?
Yeah, I mean, let me answer perhaps the element of that question that I feel qualified to answer. I'm not really an expert on, if you like, home improvement and what we can get from better insulated homes. Others might be better to answer that. But, I think that, we talk a lot about the need for investment. We talk a lot about infrastructure. But the bit of the infrastructure I think that we really need is a tech infrastructure platform. And the reason that is so important is because it will allow us, if you like, to squeeze the additional electricity that we all need, the green electricity that we all need now to power our vehicles, to heat our homes, through the existing network without having to increase the scale of that network fourfold over. So if we can give people the tools in their hands to shift their consumption away from the peak, we can massively reduce the amount of additional investment we need in infrastructure, both in generation and in the transmission and the distribution networks, in order to supply us with completely green energy. So Ofgem, for example, estimate that if we can properly achieve that flexibility in how and when we use energy, we could be saving ourselves £5 billion a year against a counterfactual where we do nothing to change and give people the tools to shift their consumption away from peaks.
So two questions then. First of all, is that what we mean? Is the system you just described what we mean by a smart grid? Is that what that is? And if so, and part two of the question would therefore be, whose job is it to put that in?
It's kind of, I mean, it's complicated, right? So smart grid partly means that the owners of the grid are operating at real time. So the transmission network, that already happens. You've got a system operator, National Grid. It's their responsibility to operate and balance real time. Our distribution networks, so the low voltage networks in the UK, are effectively gravity fed. There's no active real-time management of them. And what we need is smart operation, not just at transmission level, but all the way through to the distribution level. Particularly when you think that that's where our electric vehicles are going to be connected, we've got an increasing amount of distribution connected renewable generation as well. So we really need a smart grid. What I'm talking about is going further than that. There's one thing to put the tools in the hands of the network owners. There's another thing to put the tools in the hands of customers. And, when I talk about the need for technology platforms, yes, they need to be there at the networks, but we also need the platforms. And this is where Octopus has got a fantastic USP in terms of its tech infrastructure. It's a technology business first and foremost. We need to be helping people understand, when should I be charging up my electric vehicle? If I've got electric heating, when should I be switching it on? When should I be switching it off? And I think connecting the home to those distribution networks in a way that allows customers to be part of the solution of cheap green power, I think is where we need to be going. And when we think about infrastructure, we forget about the home and we forget about customers, then we're making a really big mistake.
I'm going to come to Miata in just a second to sort of expand a bit on this sort of designing policy that it really thinks about people and people's lives point, because I think that's kind of what you're saying. But I'm going to kind of have another go at asking you in a different way, Rachel, which is there a consensus about the urgent requirement for a smart grid? And then what are the levers in terms of consumer levers, commercial levers, price levers? What are the things that are need to happen, and are they being pulled hard enough in order to get to that point where that stuff is all up and running and working?
Yeah, yes, I think there is generally consensus. I mean, I worked in Ofgem. I was in Ofgem, even 10 years ago. There was a recognition we needed to move to a smart grid, and I think across the network owners, that recognition is there. And it is happening slowly. The technology is getting put in, particularly at distribution level. I think one of the things that is not happening enough, I think, is that the market arrangements in the energy system, the way that fixed costs are recovered, and indeed the way that renewable subsidy costs are recovered, are all getting in the way of that end customer participation and really making use of the flexibility that is only going to grow as we get electric vehicles, electric heating. So I think the consensus is there. The technology is coming in at the institutional level, but we need market reform. We need tax reform in order to really supercharge this. Dale Vince talked about democratization of owning and having access to affordable green power. Yeah. But I also think there's a democratization as well of keeping the overall system costs low and affordable for the country as a whole.
Really interesting. Thanks so much, Rachel. It was a very helpful way for me to sort of properly get my head around the sort of relationship between the generation, the distribution and the usage, and how the sort of infrastructure that will work. I'm going to come next to Miata. Miata Monbiru, you're the Chief Exec of the New Economics Foundation. Thank you so much for being here this morning. We had a great pre-chat before we met up today. In my introduction, I talked a bit about how the conversation around how we get to net zero faster, it's too easy to indulge ourselves in good guys and bad guys. Big companies are the bad guys, people who eat meat are the bad guys, heavy industry is the bad guy. It's too easy to sort of see how we could build a path to net zero that sort of, steamrolls a lot of bad behaviors and just replaces it with this utopian vision. I'm not sure that is going to happen. And B, the trade-off in terms of the pain for people and communities of doing those things and doing them quickly is just going to be too high to bear. How can you see a way to construct a policy that is more palatable, but that doesn't compromise on the thing that we all know needs to happen? Is that possible?
I think it is. I think it's a really good question. And for me, it goes to the heart of when we're thinking about climate environmental policy. There is a trajectory to net zero that we can get to. We know the set of technological solutions that we need to do that. We know where we need to take carbon out of the economy. The work's been done there. How you do it in a way that takes people with you, one, the politics of it, but critically, that's looking to protect people, that's looking to kind of maximize the upside. We know that there are jobs that can be created. We know that there is the opportunity for democratic ownership in the way that we do this. We know there's the opportunity to kind of build up communities as we do the transition. How you actually get there is a really difficult policy question. And I think one of the challenges we've had is actually the debate on climate and net zero has been, if you like, absence of the people. The question of how do you do this in a way that's just, I think is a question that policymakers are only starting to grapple with. But for me, it is the only question because there is a pathway to net zero. And my view is that we need to get there quickly. So 2050, is there, but I think it needs to be sooner. And even within 2050, a lot of the heavy lifting is going to have to be done in the next 10, 15 years in any case. So, we know what we need to do. Question is, how do we do it in a way that lifts up communities? And for me, there are 3 key dimensions to this. The first is government has to see just transition as the end goal, which requires it to think about how it invests not just in places in the transition, but in the people that are involved in that transition. And that is, everything from how do we put money into communities that, we at the New Economics Foundation did some analysis of if you were to shut down heavy carbon intensive industries, you were to shut down fossil fuel industries, where would the economic hit impact be? And it is in the parts of the country that that are already struggling, parts of the country, the North and the Midlands, what the government will term left behind. And so the idea that you would double the pain without some sort of mitigation feels, well, like political suicide on the one hand, but is also not the right outcome. So, there has to be a plan for how do we invest in places to help transition industries, to help create new industries and green industries where we know that there is going to be pain felt. How do we transition jobs? Jobs, whether it's in aviation or it's in fossil fuel, how do we do this in a way which means that we're not just saying to people, off you go, find a job in the labor market, because we know the scarring impacts of that. So we need to think about how do we help people upskill and reskill whilst in jobs, but do it in a way that allows them to transition into sectors that are created. And then for me, the third, so you can't do this on the cheap. Investment has to be a key part of that. And public investment has to be a key part of that. And then that has to then be aligned with how you're creating incentives for private sector investment in the right things that will support communities through this. And then the critical part for me is that to do this well, it requires different intervention in different places. You cannot do net zero command and control from the center. You've got to create the space for local areas to grip this, to have their own regional carbon budgets, and then to think about what does this transition look like in our place, and how do we do it in a way that protects our communities, that creates new opportunities, and critically create jobs. And if you don't get those components right, we will transition, but there'll be a lot of pain and there'll be a lot of political backlash, and the consensus that we need to create in order to do that will be massively hampered.
It's really fascinating. I can see a note actually in the chat that Nigel's just put that Biden talked about this a little bit in his address yesterday. And I think about climate change, think about jobs. This sort of the plan you describe, your sort of 3-point plan of it's not going to be cheap. You've got to create consensus. You've got to work from the ground up, not command and control. All of that makes total sense, but it also sounds really hard. And I'd love to know, if we take a sort of specific example, whether it's sort of the former mining industries in the north, or is there a sort of example or a set of examples that you can point to where they seem to be on the right track? They've started doing the right sorts of things. So the idea of a just transition becomes less of just an idea, and more of a reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. And what's the truth? The truth is, I remember the first time, my organization started to talk about just transition, and we were talking to colleagues in the trade union movement. And the question that was thrown at me was, give us one example where we have done industrial transition in a way that's just. And we went away, we did a lot of analysis and a lot of comparative, and there are not that many. We have some, but there are not that many, partly because we don't do the industrial strategy piece to kind of plan it and ensure it happens. Where I have hope is, if you look at across the country, we've got a host of local authorities that have now declared climate emergencies. There is a subset of those that are now thinking about, well, look, what does this look like? Let's create climate commissions. Let's think about what that means for our place. Let's try and bring together a whole range of stakeholders that can think about where are we trying to get to in 20 years if we are low carbon? And then what does that trajectory look like? And what are the levers that we have, both as local authorities in a place, but also as businesses and civic leaders? What are the levers that we have, and what are the levers that we need from government? And for me, that is the first start. Mm-hmm. So it is hard because we don't have a template for this, but there is an imperative. And I mean, and we know the building blocks. You've got to start with having a view of where you want to get to. Mm-hmm. I was doing some work with Croydon. and we were sort of mapping out where the opportunities for green jobs were. And, you know, I asked the question, well, presumably we must have a sort of skills pipeline that says these jobs are going to be created. We know that we need a lot of energy efficiency jobs because, you know, the job of getting carbon out of our homes is one of the biggest tasks. Presumably, knowing we're creating these jobs, we have a sense of the skills that we need. We're building up specialized academies to train people up. It didn't exist. And actually, if you look across the country, it doesn't exist. But that's bread and butter. So we know we need to do that. We know we need to be thinking about what does the investment pipeline look like in a place to allow this to happen? And what is the public sector investment that needs to crowd in private sector investment? You know, for me, one of the really clever creations that came out of the pandemic was, you know, one iteration of the furlough scheme was the job support scheme. And that essentially said, what we're going to do is, instead of saying to an industry, shed 2 jobs, government will part subsidize jobs so that you can keep 2 people on for essentially 1 job on a part-time basis. The bit that was then missing is that, well, the part that is subsidized by the government in which, you know, that worker isn't working, why are we not training them up? Why are we not skilling them up and then helping them transition to jobs that we know are being created? Germany is starting to think about those sorts of models. And for me, that becomes a really important part of our toolkit when we're thinking about what are we going to do with aviation industry as it starts to slow down? What are we going to do with fossil fuel jobs? So the component parts are there. We need to pull it together. You know, whether you call it green industrial strategy or you call it something else, how do you bring those component parts together in a very focused way that says the outcome is net zero, but it has to be net zero that creates jobs and it has to be net zero that protects our communities. Let's put together a plan.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Miata. There's a lot to think about, and it feels interesting how we've spent the morning having really fascinating and optimistic and bracing conversations where we've talked about carbon pricing, we've talked about energy generation, we've talked about consumer demand and things like that, but we haven't actually up to now talked about jobs, communities, livelihoods. It's just sort of a piece of the pie that is somehow missing in this conversation, unusually. I'm going to come next to Peter. Peter Quinn, you're head of environmental policy and strategy at Tata Steel, and I don't know how much of the morning you've listened into Peter, but there's been a sort of, you can imagine, heavy industry, if you like, has sort of at points taken a bit of a walloping from some of the conversations we've had today. But I want to sort of use what Miata's just been talking about to segue into my conversation with you. Because when we spoke before, you talked about a need to decouple decarbonisation from the idea of deindustrialisation. And to the uninitiated, I said before, I'm an enthusiastic amateur. When I imagine a clean future, what I don't imagine is a massive steelworks. But of course, your perspective is rather different. You've been working still for 30 years odd.
Hopefully I have come off mute, Liz. Thanks for bringing me in. Yeah, I didn't listen to the session this morning so far until this one. So I wasn't subject to any heavy industry bashing, but I can imagine what might have been said. I think that I can maybe do not some myth busting, but maybe try to reconcile what might seem to be disparate views. I don't think that it's as simple as there are good and there are bad. I think that the steel industry and heavy industry is actually essential as part of, it's an essential part of decarbonising society, and it's an essential part of a just transition. So let me just try to expand on that a little bit.
Convince us, Peter, convince us.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, firstly, steel is used in every aspect of our daily lives. I'll talk about steel. Apologies for that. I am somewhat focused on steel rather than some other materials, but steel is really, really important. The world currently consumes, let's say, 1.7 billion tons of steel, and the projections are that will grow to about 2 billion tons by 2030. As well as the fascinating discussion which has happened over the last half hour, I've also been looking at the chat box where there's equally fascinating discussion, and one of the themes which has been picked up in that is about consumption. And it's absolutely right that the world needs to, we've got this challenge, haven't we, where there is a lot of the world which does not enjoy the living standards which all of us on this call enjoy, and they have the right to enjoy as good a quality of life as everyone else in the world. There are ways of achieving a good quality of life for the whole world without being on a trajectory of continued exponential consumption, because that is unsustainable in its most simple fundamental terms. We need to reduce consumption. Even when we build in resource efficiency scenarios, the International Energy Agency, IEA, in its most recent road mapping, still believes that by the middle of the century, the world will still be consuming about as much steel as it currently does. So that's even when you build in lots of using steel more intensively, using materials more intensively, getting more function per ton of production, which is what we all want to achieve. So let's establish the fact that steel is going to be there for the rest of the decade, the rest of this half of the century, and almost certainly till the end of the century. And why is steel needed? Well, it's great material. It's used in every aspect of our daily lives, as I've said, from construction to transportation to communications to packaging to agriculture. It's a really, really important material, and it will continue to grow. So if we can establish that steel is important, we also then need to establish that steel is a big part of how to decarbonize the economy. Well, look at every single thing that we need to do to decarbonize, and steel plays a role. So I've talked about resource efficiency. Steel's great for that. It's very, very strong. It's very, very durable. You don't need to keep making lots and lots of it because it lasts a long time. It's very flexible. You can reuse it at the end of its life. And when you don't reuse it, it's infinitely recyclable. So it's a great material. It's a great material for resource efficiency in a circular economy. So that's one thing we need to do, is to be resource efficient. Another thing we need to do is decarbonize electricity generation. And all of the technologies which will deliver that will be steel intensive.
Right.
Be it wind turbines, be it solar farms, be it tidal schemes with big turbines. We need steel to decarbonize electricity generation. We also need steel to transport in the transmission of electricity. We need transformers and capacitors and lines. We need to do that, and innovative grades of steel can do that in a way which reduces losses through the grid. If you look at transportation, some of the briefing notes for this session talked about, maybe we need to look beyond beyond current modes of transport to more innovative forms. But we will definitely need transport. We might do less travel, but we will still need transportation of people and goods. Hyperloop was mentioned in the briefing note. Hyperloop is a steel-intensive design. Basically, it's a big steel tube. So if we want to have a vision of Hyperloop, we need a lot of steel. So I think we need steel for society, but we also need it to decarbonize. Sorry, Liz, you.
I was going to say. So let's say we agree that we need steel in order to decarbonize loads of things. Is it possible? And there was a point that was written in the chat earlier on that was quite emphatic, and it said there is no way that any kind of steel production can ever be truly said to be green, for want of a better word. I'm paraphrasing. Is that true? How can you decarbonize the production of steel? Is the exam question. If we need it, how are we going to do it safely?
Okay, so given the projected demand for steel consumption, there are two things you can do to decarbonize steel. One is you can recycle it when it comes to the end of its life. There's about enough steel scrap every year to supply about a third of global demand. And most scrap at the end of its life does get recycled. And most people on the call now will be experienced that if you leave some steel at the end of your gate on the roadside, there's usually a very, very efficient informal collection infrastructure which exists in the UK. It's got a high value and people recycle it. People will come and collect it for you. But that only deals with a third of global demand. So you still need, for a period of time until we reach an equilibrium where we've got enough scrap arising every year to make all the steel we need, we still need to make new steel, and we make it from iron ore. Now, if I said that we were going to use iron ore for the next 2 centuries, well, that starts to seem not a very good model of sustainable development, because we have to mine it from the ground. Yeah. It's abundant, but it's not infinite. It is a finite resource, and there are impacts from its mining. But we do, for at least a period of decades, still need to rely on new steel from iron ore. So how do we decarbonise that? Well, the panacea is hydrogen. So simple chemistry lesson, iron ore is iron oxide. We need to rip the oxygen off the iron to make it into iron. And we do that currently with carbon. That's what the world does. And that leads to CO2 emissions. If you rip the oxygen off with hydrogen, that forms water and no CO2 emission. That we think is the panacea. We don't think it's realistic that there will be enough hydrogen in the world or in the UK to make anything like the amount of steel we need this decade. But one of our asks of government, and we keenly await the UK government's hydrogen strategy, we do want to encourage government to work with industry and other stakeholders to build as much hydrogen capacity, green hydrogen capacity, as possible, as quickly as possible, and make it as affordable as possible, not just for the steel sector and other hard to abate sectors, but for wider parts of society, to decarbonise heating in the homes, transportation. Sorry, Liz, go on.
Briefly, Peter, if I try and summarise the perspective, that your view is it is possible to produce steel in a low carbon fashion, provided you have enough available and affordable hydrogen to do that. But there's a big question mark over the hydrogen part of that equation. We'll wait for the government's hydrogen strategy to do that. I guess my secondary question, if I've understood that right, briefly, because I want to bring in some people from the floor, would be globally, and I know you work across Tata Europe, so you're not a spokesman for the wholesale industry, but globally, our exam question for this whole initiative is accelerating net zero. If I was being cynical and challenging you, it sounds a little bit like we're doing as much as we can and we need the steel anyway, and but it really is that enough? Or are you a sort of apologist for just something that is inevitable?
Yeah, okay. I think it's a really fair challenge, Liz, and I'm looking out of the corner of my eye at some of the chat, some of it which is kind of positive and some of it not less so. But it's absolutely fine, and it's absolutely good that we have this kind of debate. I'm not an apologist. Let me just say, Tata Steel, you could trace back to 15 years ago. We were coming out very clearly and saying, hey, look, we totally agree with the science. We are not climate deniers. It's the biggest challenge facing mankind. We've got publications from 15 years ago, and we've taken a leadership position since then. We've totally committed to net zero, hopefully well before 2050. And we've embraced a target in Europe to reduce our emissions by 30% by 2030, by the end of this decade, compared to 1990. We think we'll go beyond that in our Dutch plant, which is our biggest plant and our biggest emitter, within maybe 6 or 7 years. And we are investigating all of these technologies. We want to get there as quickly as possible. Let me just quickly build on one theme, because what I was trying to say earlier was that I think we need to establish that steel is needed by society. It's needed for a good quality of life, and it's needed in order to decarbonise society globally. So then a question arises in the context of the UK debate. Well, shouldn't we just import the steel that we need from someone else? Why should we make it here? Because we don't really like the idea of these big factories with big emissions of CO2. Well, I would contend that it's absolutely the right thing to do to try to promote a sustainable steel industry in the UK. A couple of reasons for that. Firstly, if you want to show climate leadership, and the UK government says that it does, you need to tackle big problems, big global problems here. Don't just leave them for someone else. Don't wash your hands and leave them for someone else to deal with. I'd rather the UK took charge of decarbonising ore-based steel production than leave it to China. Okay, I think we need to take responsibility of global problems, not just leave someone else to deal with them, number one. Number two, just transition. The steel industry in the UK directly and indirectly employs about 100,000 people. We pay in the two biggest areas where we employ people, not just my company, but the other companies. We employ most of our people, about 20,000 direct employees in Yorkshire, from where I'm speaking now, and in Wales. And in those two regions, on average, we pay 46% better than the average wage in those regions. So we pay good money for good jobs. We train people. We've got 700 apprentices at the moment in the steel industry in the UK. We've got loads of engineers. I'm an environmental scientist. We've got loads of environmental scientists. I'm in a department now of 50 environmental scientists. 15 of whom have got PhDs in aspects of environmental science. We are producing a huge pipeline of talent into the wider economy to help the wider economy to decarbonise. It would be a very, very sad day if the steel industry were not there. And I think that the UK would be in a much worse situation in terms of seeking to decarbonise. The other thing I would say is that the universities in the UK, some of which I think most of us would accept are world-class universities, they absolutely rely on heavy industry as the test bed for their innovation. And if you look at the innovation going on in the universities at the moment, so much of it is about decarbonisation, not just of industry, but decarbonising society. Sure. So I'll leave it to that, Liz. But that really would be my contention. Steel is important. It's important we use it in the UK, that we make it in the UK. And by doing that, the UK stands a better chance of very rapidly decarbonising.
Thank you very much, Peter. I gave Peter the floor for a sort of reasonable chunk of time there, because I think it is worth sort of understanding the realities of sort of being involved in a heavy industry. I'd like to bring in, if I can now, Nigel Lake. I think you're here and have a kind of question or a comment, particularly in relation to decarbonisation of steel. Are you there, Nigel? I can see you, but I can't hear you. Okay, he's not able to come on just quite yet. I might go back to Miata then, just to respond a little bit to, obviously what Peter was talking about was in reality some of the things that you were mentioning about communities and industry support communities and what have you. If I were going to be unconvinced by Peter's argument, and I can see there's some sort of moderately frustrated comments in the chat about, yes, so we all get it, we need it, we buy the jobs, we like the thing of UK being a leader and taking responsibility and all of that, but is it going fast enough? The detail on, as Peter said, we await the government's hydrogen strategy. If hydrogen is the thing, if hydrogen is the ingredient that will facilitate low carbon steel production, which we can all agree we need, why haven't we got that on the table now? It would seem to me to be a big slice of the pie, and all of your good ideas that I totally buy about building consensus and local authorities and everybody works together. If the government doesn't play ball, we're stymied, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think that is, to be honest, the lesson of the last 20 years. We know that a big part of the answer will be technology, and thinking about how we deploy hydrogen in the context of the steel industry. If you like, the work has been done for us about how we get there. In order to partly de-risk it, in order to scale it up, we know we're going to require some level of public intervention, whether that's through investment or it's through incentives or it's through the way that we think about the tax system, which requires the government to take a engaged and muscular approach. And when it doesn't, we fall back. The story of wind is an amazing story, but it would not have happened if the government hadn't put in place an incentive structure in order to enable it to happen. We have to de-risk some of this stuff, which requires the government to step in. And in the end, in the global race, the governments that are willing to do that, I think, we should be watching what Biden's doing, because I think it's fascinating and also hugely significant. They're taking a punt. This is going to be the mode of the global economy. And those that are willing to invest in enabling industry to unlock the potential to do some of this stuff in a green way quickly will benefit from that massively. And so, we're all, and actually there is huge consensus from industry through to trade unions, through to those of us in, civil society, the NGO world, through to the academics. We're all saying, act, invest. We know what needs to happen, help make it happen. And I just desperately hope that the government's listening. I was in government when lots of people were banging on about the need to accelerate both investment, but also, R&D and things like hydrogen. And we've just been slow to move. And we're running out of time. The lesson now is we're running out of time, and it requires government to work in partnership with industry to do the things that we know need to be done.
Thanks, Miata. I'm going to bring Rachel back in on hydrogen. Rachel, you had a point to make.
Yeah, I mean, I share quite a lot of Miata's frustrations here, and government does have an important role to play. But I also do believe that actually businesses need to be ambitious and take risk and stick their neck out. So, Octopus Energy, for example, now does have a green hydrogen business. I think there's some really interesting information in the chat just about the level of investment that is happening in green hydrogen. And frankly, I think the businesses that really do have a mission to be part of the solutions towards net zero increasingly are just not waiting or getting on. And that's the same on heat pumps. There's a lot of debate about whether the future of heating is electric or hydrogen. Frankly, I don't think we've got time to examine our navels on that. We need to get on, we need to invest, we need to bring down the cost of heat pumps so that people can afford them and they're equivalent to the cost of replacing a gas boiler. And we need to get on in investing in green hydrogen so that we can get renewable and low carbon steel. We can get electric heavy goods vehicles, electric aviation. So I think that's really where we've got to be pushing, and increasingly, and I'm kind of speaking almost with my ex-regulator hat on, increasingly I'm seeing, businesses actually taking the lead here. What we need from government right now in Octopus primarily is we need, to this report out today, we need all the green taxes off electricity and onto gas so that individual customers' investment decisions about how they heat their home is one that's going to take them in a low carbon direction rather than one that just reinforces gas heating, which we're meant to be ending by 2030 anyway. So there's a lot that government needs to do. But I also do think it's important that business doesn't use the lack of pace in government as an excuse for not sticking its neck out and taking a degree of risk and innovating too.
Thanks, Rachel. That's helpful. I'm going to come to Sue if I can. Sue Wheat, who's contributed loads in the chat all day, actually, and is able to join us now. I'm happy to see you, Sue. And you've just been talking about interesting points about hydrogen too. You represent Ashton, is that right?
I do. I'm not an engineer in any sense. I just read a lot, so I can't really comment on hydrogen. I just know that there's a lot of querying about whether or not it's the panacea. So
you were particularly enthusiastic about the talent point, the point about generating opportunities, jobs, the ideal futures.
Absolutely. So Ashton supports low carbon innovators around the world, and its work in the UK is really focusing on how to up the green skills sort of economy and drawing attention to the fact that at the moment it's really, really difficult for especially small and medium-sized enterprises to enter this sector, that they feel totally unsupported and often are just with the best will in the world, they just can't fulfill their personal ambition of being able to provide a green business service to the public. And I think this is what Miata was saying, really, that the government, one of the things is that companies just can't have had their fingers burnt too many times, where government initiatives and funding comes in terms of the green homes grant, for instance, and then gets taken away and they've lost their businesses or they're high and dry. And so we're really working with councils in particular and businesses to try and hoping to get government to hear that this is something that if we're going to make progress, we've got to have people who are skilled, and we've got to have support for the businesses who then want to put those skills into action.
Thanks ever so much, Sue. Nice to see you. Thank you for being here. In the last 5 minutes, I'm going to hopefully have time to just hear from two more people from the room who've been active in the chat. First, Nigel, just briefly, a couple of minutes, Nigel, and then I'd like to go to Paul Clark. Nigel, hiya.
Hi there. Look, and firstly, it's wonderful to join you all. I'm in New York, so I haven't been with you through the whole discussion because it was a little bit cruel to be up that early.
Good morning.
But good morning, good evening, wherever everyone is. I think that the couple of things I really wanted to say were firstly to just respond a little bit to what Peter had talked about. Now, clearly, steel is needed, food is needed, lots of things are needed. We have to start bearing the cost in emissions terms of those products now through a carbon pricing scheme. Obviously, the EU already has that. And if you're in the steel industry and you don't have a solution to decarbonize today, because of course this is technologically not very easy, well, you can take action just to buy credits to offset that, or better still, involve yourself in something like industrial scale reforestation. There's complexity around that because of water availability, but it can be done today. The second thing, because I know time is short, is to pick up on what Miata said, which is the importance of this. This is a complicated problem. There is no simple solution. You have to stare it in the face, and you have to look at this in a whole of system manner. And this, interestingly, is very much what the Biden administration is seeking to do here in the US by investing heavily in greening the economy in ways that create jobs in places where those jobs are particularly needed, such as the Ohio River Valley region. Mm-hmm. And I think all that brings us back to the final point, which is, this is all about action. It's about action by government, because there are some areas where measures have to be introduced to drive the changes that are needed. But it's also about action by individuals. We can all do things in how we live our own lives, and also in how we agitate for change with our employers, with our own businesses if we own one, with our pensions if we're part of a pension scheme and it's not investing appropriately. There is a lot we can all do, so we shouldn't just rely on government to act, because I think we've all seen in different countries around the last few years that government is not necessarily brilliant at acting on some things.
Thank you very much, Nigel, and thank you very much for getting up early from New York to join us. Some interesting points there. Paul Clark, hi again, nice to see you.
Hello.
Your comment in the chat slightly sort of said, we're missing the point here. We're talking too narrow. We need to think much bigger.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been a fantastic conversation today, but a lot of it's been about what I would call the how and the what within the current thinking. And I think, given how late we've left it now to tackle this, we've really got to think much bigger than that. And we've got to find ways, to accelerate, not just go fast. We've got to find ways to work smarter and faster, more coordinated across countries, and more, with greater leverage. And I feel very passionately that, that requires kind of infrastructure, arguably at a planetary scale, around data and models and AI and things like that, as I say, to help us work smarter and faster. And that is often overlooked because people obsess a lot about, verticals, but they don't think enough about horizontals that connect these many different systems that we have to transform and optimize. And, today, I'm afraid, this latest conversation around steel and energy, I mean, those are important, but they are just two tiny fragments in a massively bigger picture. And we can't tackle all of them just one at a time with our existing tools and capabilities. We've got to stand back and think, well, what would help us go faster?
And what do you think would help us go faster, Paul?
Well, I've just suggested to you that I think it's about, I put some of them in the chat. It's around, the power of data and how we unlock all the data. I mean, this pandemic has taught us three powerful things. We needed a lot of data we didn't have. We needed better models than we had. And we needed lots of smart machines to make things and move things, and that's all incredibly important, not just for a pandemic. It's important for, sustainability and resilience, particularly towards climate change. So it's almost like, let's take that microcosm of lessons from the pandemic and think, well, how do we scale that up? Because clearly, this is not a UK problem. We've got to use, ways to kind of coordinate and orchestrate across countries. And that's something where we lack the tools. At the moment, we lack the tools for remote education, let alone, remote collaboration at a planetary scale.
Fascinating. Thanks ever so much, Paul. I sort of said at the beginning that I might need to sort of take it down a notch and focus in to make this feel real. The danger for someone like myself, and maybe for others too, is that when you talk about really big picture change, systemic change, infrastructure changes, it's hard to get your head around how that feels real and how that's going to materialize. The danger is it just becomes a circular conversation, but maybe that's the wrong instinct that I should fight against, and I do need to helicopter up and try with the big picture. So the question I was we were collectively trying to answer today was about building back better. What should we build? The framing of the conversation was sort of to do with, is it roads, is it cables, is it windmills? What are the things? Is it hyperloops? What are the things that we need to sort of create? Actually, of course, what we do need to build is consensus. Accept that there are going to be trade-offs. There are going to be winners and losers. We're going to have to fight the vested interests. We accept that in order to get to a consensus. And we certainly need to build skills is a key part of the essence of sense art. There are people, there are lives, there are communities, and we can't force through decarbonising strategies and policies that are going to, unfairly disadvantage huge swathes of people, whole countries, let alone whole counties or towns. And the third thing, and perhaps the most pressing and frustrating together, is that we obviously have to build momentum in implementing the things that we've all already agreed we know work and that we should do anyway, and be sort of relentless in removing the barriers to those things.